Oh, it's for real now. Okay, everybody, welcome. My name is Courtney Hendricks. I am the Director of Maker Initiatives. I'm joined tonight by Communications Coordinator Kelsey Walker. Kelsey, give a little wave. We work with the Maker City Initiative to support makers through different opportunities like these meet-ins. We host events at least once a month. Each month tackles a different topic. Tonight's topic, as you all know, is writing artist statements and bios. We're going to be learning from regionally and nationally exhibiting studio artist Kelly Hyder. Hey, Kelly. Kelly is an accomplished artist, winner of grants, and the Youth Education's Programs Manager at Aramont School of Arts and Crafts. She is also an ex-Mayor's Maker Council member, and we are so excited to have her. Tonight, she'll help us learn how to carefully craft a bio and an artist statement to tell the story you want to share about yourself and your work. Just a tiny bit of housekeeping. If you are new to the Maker City, you can learn more about what we do and the resources we offer at themakercity.org. And our next upcoming event is a Maker City Mingle, which is a social event, really casual, fun, get together, meet new people, see a maker space, but it is on March 23rd from 6 to 8 p.m. at Crown Upholstery. I will put a link in the chat just so everybody has it if you want it. And if not, check out the website and it's on the homepage. If you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter. We share all information about things like this and anything that we have going on in town and different community events. But we'll go ahead and Kelly, you can jump on into artist statements and bios and take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Courtney, for that introduction. It's really great to be here tonight with all of you. Like Courtney said, I served on the Maker City Council for 2 years, so it's really neat to be invited back to be a part of this event tonight. I'll get started here. Let me share my screen. Also, really quick before I share my screen, I work at Aramont School of Arts and Crafts, and I am here. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Aramont here in Gatlinburg, but I'm beaming in tonight from the Pottery Studio, which you can see the boneyard behind me. It's such a cool room. All right. Can everybody see that okay? Okay, great. Okay, so first, before I get started, I love this Calvin and Hobbes cartoon because one thing that I'll talk about is just when you're writing artist statements, I think it's so important to keep them accessible, right? So many people get stuck in these traps of trying to sound smart or sound, heady or highfalutin, and that's not the point of an artist statement. The point of an artist statement is to help your viewer understand the work and to provide accessibility, right? So to keep those things in mind when you're working on your artist statement. Let's see. All right, I'm trying to go to the next slide. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So I know better than anyone else that writing an artist statement is like the worst. It's the pits, right? I've been doing it for 20 years and even I don't like doing it, right? It's a necessary evil. And so many people say, artists, I hear them say, the work, I don't need to write an artist statement, like the work can speak for itself. Others can, anybody can just interpret it how they want, right? Or I make visual art. I'm not a creative writer, right? Like that's why I make visual art, because I don't want to write. And those things are all true, but they're also cop-outs. And there's also a lot of important reasons why an artist or a maker should learn how to write an artist statement, right? And I'm going to talk about that first before we get into sort of the process that I use. So these are some reasons right here why it's important to be able to write an artist statement, to work on artist statements, and be able to provide them to people who have galleries that ask for them. So one is to validate your work and your professionalism to galleries, to possibly like a store that's going to carry your work. Grants always ask for artist statements. Residencies, you can't apply for a residency without providing an artist statement. All of these kinds of opportunities require an artist statement. It again, it proves to them that you know how to talk about your work, right? That you know that what your work is about. Also, if you're, a small business owner and a maker, it's a way to connect to your customers and create longer lasting relationships with them, right? And repeat customers. And I think about artist statements in that way, like maybe like, out on a table, right? Or through an e-newsletter, or through a little card that you might have that you stick in with like, the packaging when you sell something or you ship something to your buyer. And it's a way for them to get to know you and to like why you make the things that you do. And again, and that makes that object more special to them if they know something about you. So I feel like even having like really small artist statements in that context is really important. You also want to provide the viewer, who are both artists and non-artists, right, with a framework with which to interpret your work. So I think about artist statements like a map or like scaffolding. It's a way to pull your viewer through the experience of looking at your work. I also think about it sometimes like a rock climbing, where you've got these toe holds, right? Or you've got like these, rocks that you're supposed to grab onto. That's like the way a viewer should navigate through your work. And an artist statement can help with that. You don't want your viewer to not understand your work and then feel, maybe embarrassed or stupid, and then they disengage, right? Like that, if there's an artist statement to accompany the work, they might not understand, especially, people who are non-artists who, again, we want to make this accessible to everyone, right? Non-artists might be the people that buy your work, right? And if they understand it and they start getting engaged with it, then they'll become more interested. They might approach you and talk to you about it, right? But if you don't have that roadmap, if you don't have that scaffolding there might be, people might disengage if they don't understand. And I'm an artist, and this is what I've been doing my whole life, but I always like an artist statement too, because there's some things that I can understand when looking at work. But then reading the artist statement, it just enriches that experience, because there's probably some things that they offer, some information that enriches the experience. It makes me understand more fully why they make the work. And I appreciate it more as well. So that's one of the biggest reasons. You also want to prevent interpretations that weren't your interpretation, right? This is a way to like combat that. If you're in a situation where somebody's going to come to your show and write about your work, they often go to the artist statement first to help them craft their review, right? Or their article. And also word of mouth. Like if you had a show and you had your work out and somebody saw it and they thought it was about something and it wasn't, and they started telling people like, oh, I saw so-and-so's work and it was like, oh, it was interesting, it was about that, but they might be way off base, right? So it's a way to sort of like hone that interpretation in, right? But also this last one is really important as well, at least it is to me, that by spending time writing about your work, you can often learn more about your studio practice. You can learn about your intentions and your decisions, and they become more clear to you. So it's a way to explore yourself and your work more, and also to generate new ideas, which happens a lot when, at least when I write about my work. So this is kind of an extreme example, but I've written and spoken at a couple of conferences, right? These like 10-page papers. And the last time I went to the CCAC conference, which was a long time ago, I think that was in 2019. But I wrote a 10-page paper about artists that use vernacular photography and they manipulate them and they bring them into the fine art context, right? Which is what I do, but I was also researching other artists that do similar things as me, and that's what my paper was about. But while I was writing this paper, I spent a couple months writing this paper, and I kept harping on this one idea about the journey of the image. And I realized after writing that paper, I was like, wow, like that's really important to me. And I don't think that that's coming across in my work at all. And so it's been interesting because I realized that through the process of writing about my work. And since then, so that's what, 4 years ago, my work is a little bit more about that now. And I've been incorporating that in my artist statements, and I've been more present about that while I'm making the work. And I feel like writing that paper, writing that statement helped me on my journey with my work. So that's one example. All right, let's see if I can, all right, there we go. So there are different kinds of artist statements, all different kinds. There are specific statements about a body of work or an exhibit, or even a single piece. I've applied for exhibitions and they ask for like a little, 3-4 sentence blurb about the piece that you're submitting as about, okay? So they might be a very specific statements, and I encourage you to, every time, if you are more of a fine artist and you have you show your work at exhibitions, to rewrite your artist statement every single time you have an exhibition. There's also, you also might be asked to provide a more general overarching statement about all of your work or all of your studio practice, and all that concerns you as an artist or a maker. I think that those are a lot more tricky to write. And I'll show you the one, I have one on a slide coming up. That's my sort of general statement that I put on my website. But it took me a long time to write it because you're thinking about like the entire breadth of your work, right? And trying to like, distill that down. I think that's really tricky. What else? You also might be asked to write, if you're proposing work and it's not finished yet, or it's in progress. That's another different kind of a statement where you're talking about work that is yet to be made. Also, statements for grants or other types of funding, they might be a little bit different as well. So, for example, I just applied for a grant, and in their sort of statement, letter of intent, they asked for you to talk about your influences. They also they asked for you to talk about your history as an artist, right? Sort of like, how you got to be where you are now. Those are things that I don't usually include in my artist statements, right? But it was a good practice to write it for that one. I learned from the process, but that was sort of a different type of statement that I had to write. Also, and I talked about this before, like little brief statements, like shorter statements to display at a sales table or in a card to be included in a purchase. If when you're wrapping something up, if you've sold a piece. And again, that will just make things a little bit more special for your customer, right? Like, feel like I'm like this because I buy from a lot of small business owners in Knoxville, right? And when I know them, or I feel like I know them, right? Then it feels like you have a connection to that seller, to that maker. And then you might think, again, it makes like more repeat sales, right? You think about them, you can buy something from them and gift that and be like, oh yeah, so this person who made this, and you talk about them, right? So that's really important in that context as well. Okay. So some things to consider when you are, and I'll talk about the process here in a second, okay? About the sort of like, the sort of like stream of consciousness writing that I think is important to do as a first step. These are some of the questions that you should think about when you're just starting off, right? They might not all get answered in your artist statement, and they might not all make it to the final cut, right? But these are all these great questions to start like probing yourself about and start writing about. Like, what motivates you to make your work? What types of materials and techniques do you use? And do they inform the meaning of the work or relate to the subject matter at all? Probably true. All the answers to these are probably very interesting. Is there something about the process that you want the viewer to know? Because the viewer doesn't get to sit with you in your studio, right? They just see the final product, but there might be some things about your studio practice that you want the viewer to know, or about your studio in general. Also addressing like the content and formal decisions and makeup of your work. So I think it's good to sit in your studio or wherever you make and sort of look around and be like, what kinds of colors do I use? Like, what are the shapes that reoccur? Are there figures? What types of mark making are there? Like, what does the viewer actually see when they are looking at your work? Because again, the answers to some of these questions, I think, would be, they are interesting. They might even be interesting to you. You look at your work and you're like, oh, I do that same sort of composition over and over again. Like, why is that? And you can start thinking about it for yourself as well. Are there some, wait, I just got lost. Okay. So what are some of your, maybe your art historical references, your non-art influences, maybe pop culture influences, musical influences, literary influences? I think that's important too. And sometimes they can come into an artist statement. I did this show back in, that was like 2012 or 2013 out at Maryville College. And the show was about ghosts. And there was like these sparkly ghosts in them. And I totally talked about Star Trek and the X-Files and some of these TV shows that like I watched a lot when I was younger, and how they influenced some of the compositions of those pieces. It was great that I was referencing that. So there might be a situation where you talk about other non-art influences. Is there something autobiographical that you'd like the viewer to know? A life experience that influences the work? If so, keep it brief and very much related to the work. So I do think even in a fine art context, talking about a little bit of piece of information about maybe about yourself, like autobiographical, that is influencing the work, again, can be really helpful. It can connect the viewer to you, right? And create sort of a, I don't know, like a human connection, right? But I also caution people not to get stuck on that too much, right? Like, this is not a journal entry. And I think that some artists lean into that a little bit too much, where it might then become a little bit too much about that one autobiographical point or story. And it also might become a little bit too much, or what's the word, make the viewer uncomfortable, right? So my rule of thumb is, yes, of course, include something like that, but to try to keep it brief and connected to the work. I also think you should think about tone. Like, is your work humorous and funny and light and like whimsical? And should the artist statement reflect that? Is your work more somber? And, or do you want to like counterbalance things, right? Like my work is like, in the subject matter is sort of somber. I guess my artist statements are usually pretty serious, right? But like, I've seen it where like, you know, like the work's more whimsical, but then the statement's more serious, or vice versa, right? So it's just something to think about. Also thinking about like, who is your audience, right? Like, is your audience in Knoxville? Is it in New York City? Is it a grant reviewer? Is it you know, is this going on your website, and is this like being projected into the, you know, World Wide Web? I think it's important to think about who is going to be reading this artist statement, okay? Because I might make a different artist statement for a gallery show in Knoxville than a gallery show in Chelsea. I never have shows in Chelsea, New York, but like, if I was going to, I would think about that statement. I would think about my viewer maybe a little differently. I think it's a good rule of thumb to always write in the first person, okay? It's just more direct, I think. I think it's important to be as objective as possible, right? And to try to talk about your work and look at your work from the viewer's standpoint, right? Because that is who's going to be reading this, and that's who's going to be approaching your work. You know, this goes with writing in the first person, but just always using direct voice. So when I've taught this workshop like in person before, and I'll sit down with people individually and look at some of their artist statements, and I'm always marking them up, because it's like, well, I hope that the viewer sort of gets this kind of a feel, or I want the work, I think that the work, no. You just say, the work does this, the work is saying this, right? Or the work looks like this, and cut out all of those like I thinks and I hopes, right? Like, be confident in how you're writing about your work. And also talk about the meaning and the concept, right? Like, and I think, you know, ultimately that's what the artist statement should be addressing, but answering all of these questions that came before that oftentimes will inform this last one, right? By the time you get to this last question, all of these other things might have helped you get there. And then you can talk about the meaning and the concept. All right. Okay, so let's see. Oh my gosh, it's 6:23 already. So the process. So I always find it really helpful when I'm starting. I do this every single time I write an artist statement. Is to just start out like stream of consciousness writing as an exercise, and to go through all of those questions that were in the last slide and just sit and write all of them out, to write pages and pages and pages. Doesn't have to be in complete sentences, just like as a writing exercise, right? And just sort of word vomit, get all those things out. And then once you have like all of those things written down, you can go through and be like, oh, like that's important. I want to make sure that that's being said. This is important. And you can start sort of just through your drafts, you can sort of start distilling that down, right? Like what you want to do eventually is to have just a few paragraphs that are really concise and direct and to the point, but you got to start out big and then start whittling it down, right? My rule of thumb is to not have an artist statement that's longer than like 1 to 4 paragraphs. I even think 4 paragraphs is too long. I try to keep mine down to 3 at the most, but everybody has their own sort of rule of thumb about that. I've had a friend in, I'm from Rochester, New York, and I had an artist friend up there who always wanted his artist statements to be no longer than like 4 sentences, but it sort of, which I thought was silly, but man, they were really strong. They were good 4 sentences. They were very distilled and concise and clear, and they said everything, and he toiled over those 4 sentences. And it sort of related to his work. His work was very distilled and concise like that too, and sort of minimal. So it worked out. But I think too, to keep the length down, you don't want to bore the viewer. Long artist statements, people will get bored of and walk away. They won't read the whole thing, right? So you want to make it to like a manageable amount of text so they don't get bored and they read the whole thing. Of course, there's situations where like, you know, the length, like for grant proposals or for residency proposals, they might be asking you for more information, and those statements might get longer, right? All right, so this is, and you can find this on my website. This is my general statement. This is like my statement about all of the work that I've ever made, or not ever, but like all of my like mature work that I've made in the last 15 years or so. And talk about, I hit on, even though it's like one little short paragraph, right? Like I hit on a lot of these things that I talked about in that list of what you should address or what you should sort of like write about. You know, I talk about what the work's about. I talk about what I use. I use found photos. I talk about the process a little bit, like creating surface embellishments. I use Photoshop. Again, a little bit about like the content, you know, how I'm talking about presence and absence, the passage of time. So the glitter on the surfaces of my pieces is like a really important material, right? So I have to address that. Like, why am I using that? And I think that it is very it's seductive, and then draws you into sort of like the unsettling subject matter. What do I use? I use photographs. What kind of photographs? Like all different kinds of photographs. Here are some examples. And I enlarge them, and I, you know, alter the surfaces, and I create these stories, right? So it's all in there. It's just very, again, and this started out as a much longer piece of text, and then I whittled it down to try to get it to this. This took a long time to write. But then too, there's statements for a specific body of work, right? So this was a show that I had in Nashville. This is a long artist statement, especially even for me, this is 3 paragraphs. And sometimes I'll even cut out the second paragraph. The second paragraph is autobiographical, is more biographical about my grandmother. And I try to keep that to a minimum, but this show is very much about my grandmother and her as an artist and me as an artist. And so I felt like in this instance, I could elaborate on that a little bit more. But if you take out this second paragraph, the artist statement holds up still. And I do take it out sometimes in certain instances where I've like shopped the work around after the show. Courtney, I have a question. Will they have access to this I know they have access to this recording afterward, but I can share my PowerPoint too with you if you ever, so they could have that to be able to return to these slides.
Yes. Yeah. If you're open to sharing your PowerPoint, we can definitely do that.
Great. I will share that with you. So you guys can look at this again. There's a lot of statements in this PowerPoint. I want to be able to, you to be able to go back and look at them at another time. Okay. So this is an artist that teaches here at Aeromont, Heinrich. He's fantastic, but I love this artist statement. So look at how short this artist statement is. But he touches on all of those things, right? So he talks about what the work is about. It's about identity, it's about memories, it's about the layering in his work, talks about memory and ancestry, what the patterning is about. But then also, in the last paragraph, that last one, he talks about how the work is made. So he's a printmaker. You can see his pieces right over here. He says he combines all these different printmaking techniques, collagraphs, monotypes, paper lithography, and image transfers, oftentimes in the same piece. That's interesting. I wanted to know about that process because I'm not with him in the studio, and that learning about his process, that statement, informs my interpretation of this part. Now I know that this work is like using all those different processes and how labor intensive that is and how interesting that is. Hand printed, all the rich color, pattern, and imagery. He's talking about what the viewer is seeing. He also sells, he sells a lot of his work. So it's important to him to have that statement, that last sentence about how he doesn't have any additions or reproductions, that everything you're looking at is an original piece of art. But I like his because this is really short, but it's hitting on like all the same things. And too, I was looking down at my notes here, the fact that he's talking about the prints all being originals, he's thinking about his audience. Remember that there was a question in there, like, who's your audience? He's writing this for set like buyers, Okay. So, and again, I'll share my PowerPoint with Courtney so that you guys can go back and look at these statements another time. I don't want to like go through and read them all, but there's a couple. So this is my friend, one of my artists and studio mates, Jessie Vanderlaan, and I've included in this PowerPoint a general statement of hers. Again, like one that's about like the overarching, like all of her work, but then also one specific to an exhibit that she had. And she's touching on some of that same things, like what the work's about, but also like what you're seeing. And here she talks about like how about so much of her imagery is from the world that we inhabit, right? And comes from the landscape or the environment. But then in her next artist statement, so this is one that was for a show. Now she's getting a little more specific, right? And talking about, rock formations and like sediment layering in rocks and geology and things like that. So this specific body of work was more about rocks, but she has other, shows and work that's about atmosphere or, it's always about the earth, which she says in her general statement, right? But different series are focused on different subject matter. She talks in here, there's a beautiful sentence about, this was also about, there's a lot of hands, again, addressing like why, like what is the viewer seeing? They're seeing a lot of arms and hands. Well, she talks about that. I often feel that my arms are my most precious resource. They allow me to hold hands with her kids. A lot of this was about motherhood, to carry bags, to wash dishes, to gesture while I talk, to draw, to write. They are always full. And I really liked that, but she's talking about exactly what the viewer is seeing in the work, which is a lot of hands. And a lot of rocks. And she talks about like what, she's layering at the very end. She talks about like layering watercolor and colored pencil and graphite. And I think, again, she's addressing like how she's making these, the tools that she's using. I think it's really nice. Let's see here. What time is it? I'm actually going to skip this one, but you all can go back. Okay, so what I want everyone to do is we're not going to do it like, if you're going to do this by, as like really writing an artist statement, like I would, expect you to spend like 20 or 30 minutes doing this, but I want everyone to just spend a couple of minutes right now writing down some answers to these questions. And then we're going to like have you guys tell me some of the answers to them or think interesting things in the chat bar. Okay, so I'm going to set my timer. I'm going to set it for 4 minutes. Okay, Courtney? Okay. All right. I want everyone to spend some time writing some answers to these questions. Okay, I'm going to do it too. All right, there's just like 30 seconds left. Okay, so that was just the tip of the iceberg, right? But I do. Oh, thank you, Kelly. So, was there anything that you wrote that came up that you thought of in answering these questions that surprised you? And if you want to share that in the chat bar right now. I'm curious. I don't know any of you. I don't know your work, but please share with me something that surprised you. No one. All right, shy people out there. You know, it was like one of the questions was about, you know, like like colors, mark making, and I use photographs, right? But like something that I wrote down was just like abundant and pattern and cascading. And I'm like, oh, those are great words. I've got to keep those words and put them in an artist, put that in my artist statement. Oh, great, Holly. So texture is really important to your paintings. Certain things I include in every piece of work, the things I tend to do every time, right? You start realizing that when you look at your work, that there are some tendencies that you lean into, and sometimes those are just about composition, they're about color, or they're about shape or subject. You should pay attention to those, like why are those the things that keep popping up, right? Why are those the tendencies that you have? And Holly, make sure like that you talk about texture, that if texture is really important, like you need to make sure that's in your artist statement. Oh, the sentimental attachment to your work. I wish I was teaching this in person, because then I could look at your work and then like talk to you each a little bit more. Choosing materials, hunting down different fabrics, definitely. I mean, I do the same with my work, like, the way that I search for photographs, right? And I talk about that in my artist statements sometimes. Kelsey Walker says, I was so surprised to see how easy it was to just write about my work stream of consciousness instead of getting the pressure to make it right immediately. Kelsey, thanks so much for sharing that, because this is why, this is like all the magic about this process. You just like word vomit, right? And you write all this stuff. And then there's going to be some really good things in there that you can start just editing down slowly through drafts. So thank you for saying that. The excitement of a scent that triggers a memory. Oh, AJ, you got to totally put that in there when you're talking about your product, about your candles. That's awesome. Hated having your photo taken growing up. Oh, they're too posed or formal. That's so important to your work, I'm sure. I'm not familiar, but I'm sure that's really important. Never thought about tone. Not sure how your tone would be described. You know what? You can always ask other people too, right? Like ask other people some of these questions and see what they say, like some of your trusted friends. Oh, the play between structure and fluidity. That is gold right there, right? So take just that little bit about watercolor, that's going to come into your artist statement, right? This is so great. Thanks for sharing all of these. Thank you for sharing all of these. This is really awesome. And I encourage you to do more writing like this to get going on your artist statements. I think my next slide is about biographies, but before we go off the artist statements, I also just want to say too, that you should always have a trusted friend editor, right? To look at your artist statements. Again, like making your work, it doesn't have, it's not going to happen in a vacuum, and having other people's input, even if it's a more informal studio visit or critique or just showing, talking about your work informally, can really influence and help you understand it. Same with artist statements, okay? Again, I've been writing artist statements for 20 years. I always, right now it's my friend Jessie Vanderlaan, but I've had other people in the past who are like my editors, who I always run an artist statement by. Everybody needs that. So pick a friend, pick somebody who's a good writer, maybe not like a professional writer, but somebody that you trust with words, to always, and they don't have to be an artist either. My friend Kate, who is in journalism, sometimes she looks over my artist statements as well as a secondary person. So make sure to always do that before they go to print too. Make sure somebody else looks at it.
Hey, Kelly, before you move away from artist statements, Dana McAllister asked if bullet style statements were acceptable.
Bullet style statements. I don't know what context. I'd have to know, like, I mean, I think for like a gallery or for, again, like proposal of some kind, I think I would think that was like a little less professional, but there might be other contexts that is appropriate. So so that's not a definitive answer, I guess. Any other questions about artist statements that came in?
No.
Okay.
Dana did just come back and say that she struggles to be a good writer, so is considering an alternate style bio.
Oh, an alternate style bio. Okay. Well, let me talk about bios and this is it's 6:45 and I can breeze through this. There's not as much to bios. Artist statements is like the big thing. Okay, so this is my bio that's on my website. This is 6 sentences long. It's really short. Again, I also think you need to keep these short and concise and to the point. You also want to put your best face forward. So I have like the things that I have accomplished that are like that I think are the most important and impressive on here, right? And you can like, I think fluffing is the wrong word, but like I say, I've had recent exhibits at Unrequited Leisure in Nashville, and the Central Collective in Knoxville, and in Maryville College, and at Lincoln Memorial University. Recent is like a little like that. Those are in the last, like, I don't know, 6-7 years, right? So, but I think that those, those are the venues that I want people to see that I think are like, showing me off the best. What else? Like one of my most like biggest accolades was I was on the cover of Number Incorporated in 2016. So I never take that off of my bio. I've been awarded the Bailey Opportunity Grants a couple of times. And I had a residency in Rabin Gap at a Hambidge Center, and that's really important to me as well. My job, you don't have to put stuff about your job, but my day job is really important to me, too. The fact that I work at Aeromont and the work that I do here. So I always include that in my bio, but you don't have to. But putting your most like, and also, and I skipped over this, but education should be like kind of the first thing. But that doesn't mean that if you didn't have formal education for your practice in a university, that doesn't matter. You can say like, oh, so-and-so learned about, basketry through experience at craft schools, right? Through a craft school education, or learned about making soap from their grandmother. I don't know, right? Like, but just a little bit about how, just a little bit about your education as an artist, I think should be included as well. So again, I'm going to share my PowerPoint with Courtney so you guys can all access this afterward and look at these a little more clearly. But here's some bios from some of our community class instructors here at Aeromont. Again, they just touch on like education, some shows that they've been in, what kind of work that they make. Sam's represented a gallery, so that little point is put in there really quick. And all these people they're teaching at Aeromont, so they're talking about their connection to Aeromont too. You also might want to include in your bio like something interesting that like relates to the work but is not really part of your artist resume, like Katie Sharp here at Aeromont. She is a cowgirl. She like legit rode in rodeos at a professional level in college. And I think that's really interesting. And she always, I think it's important that she includes that in her bio because it's like relates to the subject matter of her work. Or like another example, like if you didn't have formal training as an artist at the university, right? You could say like, I started out my life as a veterinarian, but then moved into jewelry because of XYZ, and just kept it at one sentence. But I think those kinds of things are really exciting in a bio. What else? Got some other examples here. This is an artist who's a little bit more established. And so, but also keeps it pretty succinct. Born in New England. This is why they're interested. They've always been interested in mechanics, motion, and wonders created by practical, no-nonsense makers. And then some of their accolades, right? Where they teach, what they teach, where they went to school, some of the shows, some of the publications they've been in. Sort of a list. Keep it to, like, again, the things you're most proud of. This one's a little bit longer. I want to go to this one. So you guys might be familiar with Bridget Osterling. She is a maker, Maker City, you know, she's in the directory and served on the Maker City Council as well. Courtney's wearing some of her earrings right now. But this is more of an example of like an artist statement / bio, right? This is on her website, and talks about a little bit about her, like things, you know, she likes to hike and she has 2 kittens and rides motorcycles. And then she talks about like how she became a jeweler, a self-taught jeweler, and where she, you know, living in East Tennessee. I use these types of tools and techniques. These are the kinds of stones that I like. You know, it's very simple, but it's a way to connect to her market, right? And so that they know a little bit more about her if they came across her on her website and they might be interested in buying her work. So I wanted to include this one because this one's like less of a fine art statement or bio and more from a maker standpoint. And again, I think you're always trying to like connect with your buyer a little bit. They want to get to know you. So, and I just talked for a really long time. I'm going to open it up to questions. Okay, Courtney, I'm done with my presentation. Let's see. Okay.
Did you see there are a couple over in comments? There's one from Corinne West saying, is it necessary to reveal your approximate age by adding dates if your age may be an issue?
Ooh, great question. That's up to you. I don't think age is an issue, right? And people shouldn't be ageist. But if you're worried about that, then yeah, you can just say like, I got my degree from this place, and you can leave off the date. I don't see, yeah, like you could, there's information, just like you're selecting information that you're proud of, right? You can also leave off information that you don't want them to know. And that's, so yeah, I guess that's up to you, but there's nothing wrong with that.
Then Dana McAllister pointed out that the bios that were shared were not written in the first person.
Yes.
And asked if we need both styles.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that, because I had that in my notes to say that artist statements should always be written in first person and bios should always be written in third person. I think so. So thank you. That's something I meant to say tonight. Thanks for pointing that out. Cool.
Any other questions, guys?
Well, thank you guys so much. And I'll pass it back off to Courtney. Thanks for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you all for coming out. Hold on. Oh, hold on. We got a couple of questions coming in quick. All right, so Dana says, I have considered doing a 25B things to know about me. Is that 25 bullet? I'm not sure.
Well, that's
I think it's because I was typing too fast.
Okay. Oh, 25 things to know about me. Okay. Sorry.
Is that for like for your business?
Well, like when I was saying during alternative bios, that was one of the ways I considered doing it. Like, I can't remember which magazine it does, but they'll do a whole little page and they'll have somebody famous answer 25 random questions about themselves. And so I thought if I could come up with like a little question and answer thing, and because I've tried writing and I'm really creative when I make something. I'm not really creative when I write something.
Well, I think that like doing that as an exercise might be good, to ask yourself those 25 questions and answer those questions, and then see if you could put them into a bio, and or ask a friend. If that is not your strength, right? Then you could talk to somebody who is a little bit stronger of a writer than you and see if they could help you pull that together into a bio.
Okay.
Any tips for our Maker City profile statement? Short and sweet. Courtney, you got to chime in on this. What are you guys looking for the Maker City profile statements?
Well, I think yes, short and sweet, but I think Kelly made a good point. Think about your audience. For your Maker City statements, you're not only talking to other makers that you might potentially work with, but you're also talking to potential buyers.
Great. Thanks, Courtney.
Yeah.
Made for Knoxville statements. Okay, those ones are longer. Yeah, the made for Knoxville statements. And I think, both for the Maker City directory and for made for Knoxville, if you look through some of the ones that are existing on both sites, you can get a feel for what you think is giving you a good feeling, and kind of lean towards that direction. And Rachel, when in doubt, is working with a copywriter an option for helping write your bio?
Sure, get some help. I mean, like, again, I think like doing it yourself and writing at, just like word vomit, writing things out. But if you need some help from someone to help pull it together, when I write my artist, again, like I have a couple of people, I have friends that I always have look over my artist statements before I submit them to a gallery. And one of my friends does a really good job. Like I'll write it and she'll be like, no, she just rearranges it just like a little bit. That makes more sense. And God, it's a lifesaver, because for whatever reason, like when you get stuck in your own head in your studio, right? You get stuck in your own head when you're writing. It's really good to have fresh eyes on things. So yeah, writer or an editor can help you.
You have lots of food, haven't you? Yeah. Good.
Got it. Okay. Well, if nobody else has any questions, we'll go ahead. Oh, somebody asked, what is Made for Knoxville? Good question. Made for Knoxville is a story sharing initiative. And if you go to, is madeforknoxville.com, Kelsey, help me. madeforknoxville.com. You can see there are several different stories of entrepreneurs and makers and all kinds of people talking about what they do, why they do it, all about their business and their personal, but it's an initiative to collect as many stories of Knoxville people as possible, Knoxville and surrounding areas. But yeah, go to it and you can submit to be part of it. And then also when you do it, you get a photo shoot, you can record a video session. Thank you, Kelsey, for sticking that in the chat. There's a link in the chat. Holly asked, what do you think residencies are looking for?
That's a whole other presentation.
Cool. We'll work on that for another night. Okay, so for where can we find the printed info? So that's a good way to kind of segue into, we'll go ahead and end this recording in just a second. Thank you all for making it out. We will send out the presentation along with the recording, and I will also send out a survey to ask everyone what they thought about tonight. So please let us know how you feel about the session and let us know what you'd like to see in the future. But yeah, thank you all for coming out, and thank you, Kelly, for a great presentation. Yes.